to the last speaker, who is Ilaria Capua. She's from Italy, and she is a veterinarian. She is, I give you a little bit longer introduction than the others because she's a quite unusual person. She's quite different from all of us. Yeah, she's a vet, she's a woman, she is a virologist.
A woman.
That's only 50%. She's a virologist, but most of all, she's a politician. So she went into politics 2 years ago, and well, you're going. And I've been mystified by your title. I didn't understand it.
Close because you never listened to me. That's why you didn't understand.
Okay, Ilaria, the floor is yours.
So Ab said you have to talk until 12. So I have exactly 13 minutes. Right?
But you will take
and this is not what
anyway.
Politicians get. I mean, they get to talk more than anybody else and say absolutely nothing. So let's see if I can turn this paradigm around. So I'm going to start from many years ago, and I'm going to start from a quote of Galileo, who is considered the father of modern science. So it's not Ab who's the father of modern science, it's Galileo. Nature is implacable and unalterable, and quite indifferent to whether she's comprehensible to us or not. And I will pick this up again at the end of my talk. So influenza outbreaks encompass events that can be predictable, rather unpredictable, very unlikely, very surprising, or surreal. And anybody who works in the influenza field knows this. And the international scientific community, which we represent, has the responsibility of generating sound scientific data to improve knowledge and to advance in science. But is this enough? And this is a question I have for you. I have no numbers, I have no truths, I have no solid answers. I just have ideas in this talk. What I think we need to do as scientists working in flu is maintain interest to secure funding. And this is not only related to flu, it's also related to other emerging infectious diseases. So where does my title come from? My title comes from scientists have, I think, the great responsibility of disseminating information and making the public aware of what they're working on. So we have close encounters of the first kind, which is scientists to the general public. Close encounters of the second kind, which is scientist to scientist. There are many conferences where lots of people, lots of scientists talk about their little protein or their little genome fragment to one to each other, right? And they're very happy and very excited. We have the third kind, which I think has been greatly neglected, which is scientists to politicians. And I really would like to commend the second father of science, Ab Osterhaus, for putting together this SPI track, because it is important that scientists wake up and talk to basically who funds them and who gives them direction, whether they like it or not. This is why we need to talk to, well, I actually need to talk to myself, but we need to talk to politicians, because they give us, they allocate funding, they give direction, and they give strategy. So about 2 years ago, I positively answered the call of this former Italian prime minister who phoned me up and said, would you be willing to run for parliament? And I said, is this a joke? And he said, no. And so I said, yeah, why not? I mean, when am I going to get this chance again? And so I actually find it amusing that Nature says Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti on the left, just in case, you know, somebody thought that was me. And you've seen... And you've seen the effect that politics has done on my hair. Okay, so this has been a learning curve, right? Because, like, I've been a scientist playing around with my little viruses and with my proteins and genome segments. So I started off clueless, got naively confident. Now I'm here, discouragingly realistic, okay, about how politics work. And I've learned a lot of lessons, and I'm here to tell you a few of these lessons. The first lesson is that this is what a science interrogation in Parliament looks like. Nobody's there. Nobody is there. Nobody cares. Okay? Understood? Nobody. Ebola? Nobody. Lesson number 2 is that this is what politicians are interested in. And they're not interested in the article, they're interested in the headline. And a lot of you know that the headline often doesn't reflect what is said in the article. This is what is most important to politicians, which is what their constituency thinks of. They don't care whether this is true or whether it's not true. They respond to a constituency. They respond to people who vote for them, okay? And they are very, very attentive to what these people say. And they are very afraid of this. They are afraid of being criticized on their integrity. And they are really, they really back off from anything that can hurt them from this point of view. And they look at the web. Everybody looks at the web. And one point that I want to make to you, and I've just picked out a few shots taken from the web about recent influenza information which has been of interest to politicians. And this is what they read, okay? And I would really like to commend Wendy Barclay. I don't know if she's at this meeting, but she really tried to respond to the international press to say, hey, wait a minute. I mean, it's not exactly like this with this whole Tamiflu story. This is what they read. This is what they love to read. This is what they're scared about. Escapes from laboratory, bioterrorism, and scientists don't know what they're doing. This is a very controversial issue, and they would rather stay away from it unless they really are pulled into the discussion. And then, you know, you get like this headline where they say, we don't have any antibiotics. So like a politician doesn't know that a virus cannot be fought with an antibiotic, okay? They don't get it, right? They don't. And then, so they, you know, they say, but what do you mean? Look at all of this mess and look at all of these crazy viruses that people are creating, and we don't have antibiotics. Okay, which is not exactly bridging the gap, but we don't have antibiotics, and this is a big problem. And look, politicians are not the smartest people on the planet, and you need to make things easy for them. And this is my take-home message. You need to make things easy. Because what I see, and this I'm being serious about it, is that if we give controversial information and say, you know, things like, this is a big scare, but Tamiflu doesn't work, and we continue to give information which goes in one direction and then in the other direction, we're actually playing snakes and ladders. We do one step forwards and two steps backwards. And this influences our credibility and influences our funding. So just to make you understand who we're talking about, these people, their main objective is they want to be reelected, number one. They want to keep, and how do they achieve this? They want to keep away from scandals and controversies, and they want to address issues which give them popularity. So people can say, he's a good politician because he's fixed my problem. And the bottom line is that there's not a lot of money around. There's not a lot of money around in countries. There's not a lot of money around in Europe and in the rest of the world, except for certain growing economies. Politicians are pressurized by many interest groups, like the animal rights people, for example. I mean, these people have enormous impacts because they represent a lot of votes. They want to put their money and attention on sure bets, and sure bets are impossible with influenza. Look at this. I mean, I downloaded this from the CDC website. This is what influenza looks like. I mean, a politician can understand this, okay? Look, this is the pandemic. This is the 2013. These are previous years of let's say, the impact of influenza, okay, for the average politician. I mean, how can you make any statement? How can this be a sure bet? It can't. And on top of that, the whole zoonotic influenza, an emerging virus, emerging disease influenza, so whatever comes from animals, is even more difficult. And so our statements are full of if this happens. since this has happened, and if this happens and this happens, when this will happen, or this can happen or this can happen. And the worst word we use is if, because that is terrible for a politician. I mean, if is, you really can't take it. And so these people are completely confused as what they should be doing. I mean, I'm sure that the team here did a lot of work on spitting out exactly the words they wanted to, right, exactly what they wanted to say. Now, get somebody who's not very smart, who's got his phone always ringing, who's busy about many other things to understand what message we are trying to get across, like with this and with that. Like H5N1 only needs a handful of mutations to become transmissible through the air, and since it emerged, it has killed more than 650 people. Wow. Since 97. That's a lot of people that died. And 60% of which have died. So you understand. So going back to being a scientist, what are we selling? We are selling a hazard, we're selling a risk, we're selling a threat. We're not selling something that they can buy and that they can advertise and that they can use. Flu outbreaks for which there has been an alarmistic media coverage, like H5N1 and H1N1, are perceived by the public as a hoax, and they don't like this. And then you get the general press follow-ups that point to the conspiracy theory that we all are very much aware about. And I would like to step back a little bit and put influenza in general as an emerging infectious disease, because it is so unpredictable. And so, you know, we really don't know what's going to happen each year. And in general terms, if emerging infectious diseases may be perceived by the general public and by the political community as a major health issue, and in that case, they will attract attention and attract funding. Or it may not be perceived as a major health issue, or, and this is, I think, what applies to flu, not maintain the characteristics of a major health threat. And so what it will do is it will initially attract attention, funding will be made available at the start, and then the hoax and conspiracy theory emerges, funding is reduced, and our credibility is shaken. You don't know how many times, when I'm in Parliament, I said, I'm a scientist. And what are you, a virologist? And what do you work with? Flu viruses. The bullshit of bird flu. No, this is what you get. This is what you get.
Don't tell me, yeah.
Plus, so apart from this, we even have the scientific community that questions itself. And so there's this paper that came out not that long ago, Emerging Respiratory Viruses, Is It Much Ado About Nothing? And in this paper, basically what they say is that here you have diseases which have a greater impact on health than flu, and particularly than bird flu, and look at the number of papers that have been published. So they have this index, publications per death. But anyway, no, it gives you an idea of how controversial it can be, even if the scientific community, isn't really sure about what they should be, promoting. Okay, look, I've downloaded this from the web, and it's how in the US, so this is a European meeting, there's a lot of colleagues from the States, and I think that this is actually really, really smart, what has been done in the US. What they've done is they have not talked about the diseases as diseases only, but they have mentioned the impact. So they say, okay, there's not very many cases of avian flu and MERS and SARS, but the impact, the economic impact, has been extremely high. And so they move it to a different level. And similarly, this has been released, and what we are talking about in the US is global health security. And what they say is that it is an investment for the US and a top priority for the Obama administration because it protects the American citizens. So if you work on global health security, the American citizen will be more protected. And this slide I found quite fascinating. Basically, a lot of the funds, most of the funds that come for emerging infectious diseases are from the Department of Defense. And this is smart, from the people who have been able to promote this and to push this. So we don't have a Department of Defense in the European Union, but we have framework policies. And this is not the solution to our problems, it's ideas. If we want to continue to secure funding for emerging infectious diseases and for flu, we need to plug them into something which is existing and something which is of interest to the political environment in that given time. So we have major issues with immigration policies, especially the south of Europe, international cooperation. We have burden on health services. We heard about it before. We have the equality of EU citizens. So why should a citizen in Portugal have a greater risk of dying than a citizen in Sweden? We have gender equality. And kids, kids. If a kid gets sick, who's going to look after the kids? The father? Me, I don't think so, especially in Southern Europe. Okay, so we have gender equality issues, and of course we have scientific excellence, which a lot of people talk about. And if we can be really strong, we should be able to push this in. So my take-home message is don't ignore politicians. Agree on a few simple, clear take-home messages for politicians. Be prepared to manage the hoax or conspiracy journalistic interpretations. We need to fight these back because every time that something comes out, our credibility is shaken. And stop thinking that the scientific community does not need to interact with politicians like it's not my job, somebody else is going to do it, and it's not my problem. So going back to Galileo's statement, nature is implacable and unalterable and quite indifferent to whether she's comprehensible or not. I think that if we are the leading scientific community on flu, we need to make this more comprehensible than what it has been up to now. Because One Health is actually animals and people in the environment, but it's even politicians, scientists, the public, the press, and the constituency. And I really hope that we can improve this, get at least 15 people in that room to listen to Ebola. And this is my last slide. So it is our problem, and the only thing worse than being blind is having sight, so you know your stuff, you know your proteins, you know your little mutations, but you have no vision because you don't have a plan to move this forward in the national or in the international agenda. Thanks very much.